Why don't we get started since people are filling in and are joining us in this remote format. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jason King, and I am a director at the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at New York University. Happy to be here to moderate this exciting roundtable on Black Speculative Masculinities.
Oh.
We have an amazing trio.
Musicalities.
Sorry, musicalities. Musicalities.
We can talk about that too.
Sorry, we might include masculinities in our discussion of musicalities, yes. Black Speculative Musicalities. I think I've been staring at Zoom too long, and I saw a different word. And I'm happy to introduce the panelists for today, Vijay Iyer, Kwami Coleman, and Nina Sun Eidsheim. So we're going to start with Vijay. Take it away whenever you're ready.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Vijay Iyer. I'm a music maker, live in New York City, I teach at Harvard. And just going to tuck right into this here. I didn't even really title my talk. I think...
Vijay, before you begin, I'm hearing a little bit of audio on maybe a microphone is touching something, or a phone is touching a microphone. Just want to...
How's this? Test 1, 2.
That's good right there.
Better? Okay. I maybe called this talk Love Call, Approaching Black Speculative Musicalities. So here it is. These 3 words, Black Speculative Musicalities, open out onto a vast terrain. None of them resolves to a single meaning. Each one points, traces, asks. What might we mean to identify by setting them together? I won't spend too much time defining the term speculative. It is associated with practices of world building that diverge from empirical reality and imagine different counterfactual social orders from our own. Hence, a history of Black speculative thought would include Afrofuturism and abolition. Musicality is an aesthetic term referring to how or when music establishes its own musicalness, how mere music becomes truly musical. Over the last year or two, I've been seeking to repurpose this vexing word as a critical concept, much as the terms instrumentality and vocality have opened their respective categories in recent scholarship as contingent, generative, and historically emergent. With musicality, music's status is not freely given. It is conferred. It is the result of a process in which you, the subject, feel guided or hailed into an affective relation with the sonorous acts of another. The category of music therefore aligns with the category of the human, which is itself explosively unstable, as Black scholars from Fanon to Sylvia Wynter to Zakiya Iman Jackson have long argued. In challenging the systemic, violent rearrangements of the human category, the coloniality of man, Black, queer, and feminist theorists have cultivated restorative models of being human as praxis. Following their lead, we might understand musicality as a dynamic, intimate sociality. As our systems rupture, new musicalities emerge as embodied, that is, both active and affective, relations among beings and objects. With Black speculative musicalities, we are bearing witness to an insurgent sonic world building. Fugitive Black operations becoming musical, affording intercorporeal movement, pleasure, release, ascension. I'm going to speak with and around a few musical examples. First is Alice Coltrane, Turiya Sangeetananda, playing the piece Prema. And this is solo piano when she appeared on Marion McPartland's radio program. And I'm just going to ease into it somewhere in the middle. I have to, sorry, 1 second. Let's try this. pedal tone, widely spread chords, encompassing all that is within reach, tremolos bloom, a left-hand melody tolls, roots shift. An orchestral polyphony gathering enough energy through the piano to conjure a multitude. Grab hold of the trail, carry the pain and the healing force at once. Proclaiming to the heavens as it thunders. Each modulation upward feels like the turning of a season, possibility of change, offering the sustenance of optimism amid our foreboding chaos. A sustained tremolo throughout marks the sheer work of its magnanimous, selfless, divine, eternal life. The work of the hands. A dramatic move to major, to joy, hope, prayer, exit. As she once stated, the key to being an artist is giving abundantly. Cascading lines of exaltation, the goddess's blessing.
Vijay, just to let you know, it was hard to hear you over the audio. I don't know if that was the point. I didn't want to stop you, but if you might want to redo a little bit of the speech so we could hear it.
Oh, sure. Well,
But it's up to you.
That's okay. Maybe what I'll just say is that, the last bit of what I said, which is this dramatic move to major, to joy, hope, a prayer answered. As she once stated, the key to being an artist is giving abundantly. My next example is the Detroit techno artist Robert Hood, and this is Minus. It starts all of a sudden, you move in your biped frame, but the arpeggio comes in threes, orbiting and breaking your asymmetry. Its brutality is that it does not change. As it hangs in the air, you start to notice different things about it, like an endless polyphonic crystal. You notice the reverb cloud that seems to hang in the background, reactivated every 1.5 beats. But then this cloud coalesces into a single note that does not belong. This B natural forms shifting moire patterns with the top B flat to the G minor arpeggio. It ping-pongs around that top note, toggling among a half dozen possibilities, forming iterative, machinic blues relations. Is this a song or some other thing? We are left to contemplate the eventfulness of what is transpiring, the percolating half-step shifts as form, as melody, as a crux of significance. The question I must ask when I take on this exercise is, what are my analytical details doing in relation to what the music is doing? How do I stop the violent agenda of musical analysis from hijacking the music's function or ignoring the conditions to and under which the music is responding? What is hiding from such analysis is how these musics reconfigure their spaces, reorder sociality. I'm going to bring in Acid Tracks by Future from the Chicago House oeuvre. To listen in earphones is to remain fixed in a single spatial orientation to the music. You are a lone, stationary observer, pinned to the sweet spot of the stereo image. But to be in a room with other bodies, with sounds bouncing off of every surface, feels quite different. One moves through and is immersed in the very same air that is vibratory medium of sound. The bass frequencies hit you in the stomach. They modulate the air in stride-length sine waves. The high-end claps and hi-hats flood the atmosphere, clatter off the ceiling, lift the hair off the nape of your neck. Pan-synthetic tones float impossibly around the room. The tweak of a filter knob makes objects change color on a temporal arc that fuses with your own mounting emotional state. This music is not of you. It seems not to be of anybody, and yet you feel guided, invited to move and feel with it. The only body present in the place of any musician, the DJ at a console, you worship as you would an officiant, for they serve as conduit for an unseeable power. Musicality emerges not simply in the interplay of the song's formal attributes, but in your very relationship to the floor, walls, and ceiling, to the vibratory excitations of the very air you breathe, and to the co-beings alongside whom you maneuver and sweat and live, with whom you dissolve into collective sensation and action. This world that calls you into it did not exist until it did a few decades ago. In post-industrial Detroit and Chicago, this you is therefore also new. These new musical and human relations are the historically emergent result of black and queer invention. What I've sought to identify here is that quality of the black radical tradition that exceeds all frames. Moments of black sonic actions becoming musical, ideating and calling into being an impossible future. I do not mean to romanticize this quality. When I say impossible, I mean in literal, continual danger of white supremacist terror and anti-black violence. As a non-black person, I do not intend to make a callous pronouncement or some ineffectual, warm assurance about black music and liberation. Rather, I am trying to listen as closely as I can to moments of instability, insurrection, and especially reconstruction, in which black subjectivities, black music makers, black counterpublics sonically hearken new ways of living, relating, listening, and being, new arrangements of time and space, new imaginings of the social, bending, breaking, burrowing under, or flying over the existing order of things, collectively conjuring otherwise sonic architecture. In Coltrane's phrase, living space, or in Sun Ra's phrase, alter destiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. I just want to let everyone know you can ask questions at the end of these presentations. You will be unmuted at that point, and then you'll have a chance to just speak out if you'd like to. You can also drop questions in the chat, and we can take those as well. Okay, I'd like to transition now to Kwami Coleman. Take it away, Kwami.
Thank you, Jason. Nina, did you, because just on the side, we spoke about order yesterday. Nina, did you want to go now and then I can follow you? Is that cool, or should I
think that might work better, yeah.
Okay, so let's do that. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to say welcome.
Thank you.
Nina Sun Eidsheim, just so you have a proper introduction.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Vijay, for providing this frame that we're speaking within. So I'm Nina Eidsheim, Nina Sun Eidsheim. I work at UCLA and a number of other places, and just very, very happy to be thinking with all of you. And as I think many of you know, there's been a recent and still ongoing conversation regarding racism within music theory. And I have to admit that I haven't really followed it very closely for a number of reasons, but there will be a time where I have to just dive into it. But I won't go into detail in regards to that specific discussion here, but I want to mention it, kind of put the pin in it, because issues of racism in Western music scholarship in general and music theory in specific is a topic I've devoted much of my scholarly career to name. I've tried to name the manifestations and ramification of this, of racism within music studies. And the particular work that sparked the current debate regarding racism within music theory, Philip Ewell's deconstruction of racism in Schenkerian music theory and analysis system, is brilliant, and it's important, and I look forward to really working very carefully through that. I myself have worked to show underlying systems and assumptions that orient the sensorium in alignment of concepts. So they're concepts, and we have been taught to align our sensorium in accordance. And while scholarship that critiques Western music scholarship as focused on melody, harmony, and meter is key to understanding this kind of intellectual heritage, I've gone to what I believe are underlying concepts, such as even sound, that sound is the way that music presents itself to us, and the notion that music is for the ear, and that when we hear something and when we name it, for example, this is the unmediated sound of a tragic life and blackness, as opposed to superb vocal technique calibrated for maximum emotional impact. I'm thinking of ways that Billie Holiday has been named here now. We have been led to believe that this sensorium that has been really calibrated to hear this as this tragic life, rather than superb technique, is in fact just a result of this encultured way of interpretation and giving meaning of sound, giving meaning to sound. It's just a system. This system has been presented as truth to us. So as I've turned from studying vocal timbre to thinking about the philosophy, the palems, the towers, the artwork, or what maybe some might think loosely about as the scores or artwork that can be played, and the performances of artists such as Wadada Leo Smith, I'm facing the limitations of music theory on a daily basis. So over the last 3 years, I've been working on identifying some of the underlying metaphors and the sort of spinning out assumptions that has guided music theory that I've been trained in. I think many people who are on this call have been trained on, and which I really have come to understand has colonized my sensorium, and which I'm now been in a decades-long process of trying to expand beyond. Hence this framework, Vijay, is so useful, your framework. And there are many innumerable ways, I think, to organize and articulate these metaphors. But the three metaphors I've landed on so far are both overarching, in that countless other metaphors flow from them, and that they organize much of music theory. And they're organizing in that the majority of people who make music even organize their music according to it. So they organize the music so they kind of fulfill these metaphors. So these metaphors are operationalizing their own kind of existence. And I think when we play music within them, they kind of screw the screw of their truth even tighter. And there are, of course, many exceptions, and those are the ones I think that we just heard about. We heard some of this music, and which we're working to think about in this panel. And of course, Wadada Leo Smith's work, which I mentioned already. So these three metaphors, what are they? I think one, and they're in no particular order, but let's just say the first, is that music takes place within linear time. I think linear time is a metaphor rather than a truth, rather than something that exists in the world. It's the way we orient our lives and our music. So for example, that overarching metaphor, linear time, allows us to think about music, or forces us or suggests and asks composers to do this, to organize one note after the other. So the first note, the second note, the third note, or the first sound, the second sound, the third sound, or sounds at the same time. that's exactly it operationalizes the same metaphor. Or there's a beginning, a middle, and end of this piece of music, or the music is on, the music is off. Music in time. The second, music takes place within a proscenium relationship with listeners. So music takes place in front of us. We reorient our bodies, and we pay big bucks to sit in front of the symphony orchestra in the Disney Hall, for instance, rather than behind. It costs less to sit behind, and acousticians who create concert halls maximize the acoustic for when you sit in front of the music, right? So then, of course, the music sounds better in front, so we sit in front. So this, and then again, the sensorium is wired for this. We optimize it both in space and also when it's reconstructed through a sound system. Much of those sound systems are sort of left-right, and we think about, I can hear where the violin would be placed, within my frontal view. So music becomes like a painting. It's this two-dimensional relationship, it's proscenium view. And of course, not music, sound doesn't act like that. Sound is transmitted, transducted through material, air, for instance, and then it hits a surface, let's say a wall, and then it comes to us from all sides. And this is what acousticians who are working on these kinds of spaces are trying to suppress. And Vijay just mentioned this. He just said, not music. He talked about music that doesn't act like like this. And he said, for instance, sound bouncing off every surface, right? Is not the proscenium kind of relationship to us. Third metaphor, music as text, text as music. The assumption that we can read music and that in doing so is considered a full experience. And of course, with that comes music that isn't read is a lesser form of music, and musicians who can't read are lesser musicians. I mean, these all kind of spin out, and that we should transcribe music. And then when it's transcribed, that becomes a version. And even when we play cadenza within a piece of music and bring our full self to that, we're still playing within that score, that written text. We can also see the score in our mind's eye. A composer might see the music, the score in his or her or their mind's eye as much as hearing it, and these are as valid. I believe this is a valid way of experiencing music, but it's become sort of the pinnacle of the text is the pinnacle. And is also being, there are all kinds of copyright issues, of course, that flows from this that I won't go into. And this musical text is also then valid for hermeneutic and other kinds of sort of textual analysis. So then the order flows from there. So music is also oriented. We start to see it visually as well, like on a page, and then up and down. The note goes up. What does that mean? Sound is energy. It doesn't go up or down or left or right. And I would imagine that most of you know of Lakoff and Johnson's work, and they suggest in the text metaphors we live by, that metaphors may unconsciously shape the way we think and act. And one of the metaphors they use is the governing system as a body, the head, for instance, of the government. And we don't really put our people in, although some churches are kind of organized like this architecture, but we don't play these out physically. But in terms of music, what I'm trying to say is that we're really playing these metaphors out in a physical, sensorial way. We're acting out these metaphors on a daily basis. And when we feel it differently, we fail the test, basically. So these metaphors, I think, have been operationalized or have operationalized themselves, and we have helped them for hundreds of years. And I don't know how far we actually have to go back. I have a research group now who's working on this, and some of its members is insisting the bone flute is the origin, but I don't know if I buy that yet. So we're still in the hot debate, and I will keep you updated. But it's oriented our sensorium for a very, very long time. And what it's done to our sensorium in terms of music is that it has helped us, or it's kind of forced us to understand music as a static and as a two-dimensional phenomena. And when we experience music outside of these three metaphors all the time, but when we do, there's not really a way of, we don't have systems or like ways and vocabularies to really understand them. And they're not on the test, so to speak. And it's not understood as real knowledge. There's no room for taste, memory of place, or a mouthful of a piece of music on the musicianship dictation test. If I hear a piece of music and I say cinnamon, big red cross or arrow or whatever, however people do it these days. We don't have the adequate music theoretical tools to understand and further knowledge that that the multisensory, the relational, and the emerging phenomena of music. So I think we need to start with the music and build tools from there, much as what Vijay demonstrated, and I think Kwami will demonstrate as well, and build the tools from there, a Black speculative musicality, rather than selecting music that fits or doesn't fit with these old assumptions and these architecture of sensorium. So I'm ever so grateful to Vijay for naming this really urgent need of thinking and feeling through and about Black speculative musicalities. And I hope we will be able to convey through this roundtable that there is no need. I'm not advocating, and I know that Vijay is not advocating for building a new kind of overarching system or framework. What I think, well, at least I'll just speak for myself, what I want to and do commit to is investigating artists' work from the world that they built and let them show me where I fail, show me where I am at loss for words. And I think the loss for words and the loss for ability to think and the loss for vocabulary is the most important place to end up, because that means that we're in a new place. It feels uncertain, it might feel speculative, but I think we need to be there. I don't want to ace any test that is built on values that I can't ascribe to. So go to the music, go to the listeners, go to the makers of new and speculative worlds. Thank you.
Jason, thank you, Nina and Vijay. I'm really happy to be on this panel. I'm going to do something that I'm not really used to doing, which is kind of like talking about me and my life. But I mean, honestly, on the level of speculation, I thought that that would be the best way to approach it. So I'm going to try to share my screen. I don't know if people can see my presentation. Is that, you can't, oops, sorry, it's gone away. Give me one more second. I'm going to do it one more time. Here we go. Cool. So the way I just wanted to maybe address the topic of the panel of our roundtable on Black speculative musicalities is to kind of speculate on my own family, specifically my father. And just, I don't want, this is not like meant to be this kind of like, Donahue kind of like, let you into my personal life type thing. But like, I think it's a kind of demonstration on how, given certain factors, structural factors, but also familial factors, we may find ourselves forced to speculate on how we even approach music, how we understand music's many values in our own life, how we then apply value to music. I mean, just to be anecdotal, I mean, I'm sure we've all had experiences about listening to a recording, maybe in the car or in the living room of our home, and that's shaping much of the way that not only we understand music and what's good and what's bad, but also how we understand ourselves vis-a-vis the social world that we're in, which is to say that if your father liked classic rock, you may or may not like classic rock, but you have an insider knowledge in either classic rock or jazz or something like that, that maybe apportions itself to your identity, your understanding of self. So that's the angle that I wanted to approach. And this is kind of out of my comfort zone because I tend, like many people in academic spaces, to talk about the objects over there, but I'm going to try to make the object me and here. So I'm going to speculate on my own Black musicality. So to do that, I'm going to just move through some slides. And the first slide is of my father playing sometime in 1975 or 76. So this is a photo of my father seated at the piano, playing with his band members at the time, whose names I don't have because this is one of many photos that I've inherited. My father's passed away a few years ago now, but are a part of a life that he didn't ever really speak about. And for those of you who, know anything or are familiar with many narratives around Black American life, but also migrant life and migrant families, the notion of disjuncture of family histories that have something to do with either migration or trauma or other big structural factors is something that many of you probably have also dealt with too, that there are family members who have these stories that we are never made privy to. So this kind of falls in line with that. So these are band members I don't know, but I do know the context. This was for a fundraiser for a Black American mutual aid organization, probably maybe having something to do with the Nation of Islam. Maybe not, I'm not sure. But this was probably at a theater in Brooklyn or Harlem, and this is my father playing with this group. So why is this important? Well, I wanted to kind of think about Black speculative musicality as maybe involving three types of insider knowledge. And those are kind of three types of insider knowledge that I see as being a part of my father's life and also my own, which is one being a vernacular kind of insider knowledge, right? So we have an insider knowledge to maybe vernacular music traditions that inform how we may approach our instruments as musicians or how we approach music as music listeners, which is to say, if you grow up in, what might be considered a subculture or community-based environment, you have access to a particular kind of vernacular that you may identify with. So that's one level of insider knowledge. Another one might be academic, which, as Nina was saying, those of us who pursue music in institutions like conservatories, colleges, or university are forced to confront this this kind of recondite, maybe not recondite, but certainly like abstract level of music knowledge that has everything to do with Western music theory. And it involves us mastering that knowledge, mastering those tools. And it also validates us as musicians in, the Western world writ largely. Well, actually globally now too, which is to say that if you can speak with authority on musical topics using music theory, it does grant you a kind of authority. And so that's another kind of insider knowledge. The last kind of insider knowledge that I see being a part of this story is one of industry. So for those of you who work in any part of the pop music industry or the commercial music industry, you know how much having an insider's edge on how that business works has everything to do with the way you sell fashion in public. And so my point here being that something like vernacular insider knowledge can be community-based. It can be vertical in the sense that there's a hierarchy, right? Like you might imagine in New Orleans, where in any one of the tribes that march in Mardi Gras, there's like a chief, someone at the top of the hierarchy, or any kind of other community level organization where there's a master who almost in an apprentice-like system bestows knowledge onto usually younger musicians. So it's vertical in that way, but also horizontal, because community spaces are horizontal social spaces in that exchanges happen, not necessarily abiding by a hierarchy, but just in terms of people networking with each other and sharing with each other as equals, sharing some kind of experience. So a vernacular musical space can also be subcultural, of course. Academic spaces, in my view and in my experience, are thoroughly vertical. And have everything to do with hierarchy, and including hierarchies of knowledge. And so I bring that up in relation to this picture too, because here we have these Black musicians playing on largely European instruments, like the piano, like the soprano sax. The cymbals on the drum set to the far right, that kind of throws a wrench into the whole thing, right? These are instruments that come from what we call the Middle East, or Asia, South Asia, East Asia, right? So even there, there's a bit of a wrench in the machine. But the whole point being that, even in the stylization of the suit, we get maybe this this portrayal of a certain kind of respectability, something that is legible as being, respectable and sharp, and something that performers and also academics confront. When we present, we put on our best wares. And then the industry space, I think, is something that is also vertical, particularly because it's profit oriented, and that kind of that creates a set of incentives where things are devoted to profit. So that I just wanted to paint that very quickly, and in just my remaining time too, just cycle through some other pictures too. So here we have a picture, and I really love this lady kind of looking on with, kind of like admiration in the way that, maybe an elder in the community might. But, you know, so my father was involved in a lot of Islamic community-based organizations. And I bring this up in the context of Black speculative musicality because I think part of that notion involves, as Vijay mentioned too, liberation. So what are ways in which people can self-liberate given oppressive context, right? A lot of that has to do with how we understand and may even self-fashion identity. So for those of you who may not be familiar, you know, there were movements starting from the 1910s and 20s up until the very present where African Americans, you know, I mean, take Malcolm X being one of the most iconic examples of this, who accept that they've been cleaved off of their history, of their heritage, their African heritage, and seek to redress that by coalescing a new identity around a religion like Islam that is not European. So it provides a link to an ancestral homeland, an ancestral lineage, even if it's somewhat mythological in the sense that you assume this identity, right? So Malcolm X, before he presents himself as El Haj Malik El-Shabazz, went by Malcolm X, with X being the variable for an identity that is unknown, that has been violently taken out of hand. So that's how this music is operating in this context as well. So we have community, but we also have a sense of like insider knowledge in that, you know, a level of mastery that it takes to play these instruments that carry with them this kind of symbolic value, like this grand piano, like this upright bass. These are instruments that we see in concert hall spaces, in reserved, rarefied spaces, and in academic spaces. So that's a little bit of my father in the 70s. So not quite in closing, but almost there, I'll bring you through a little bit more. So here's my grandmother, an alto saxophonist. Here's my grandfather and grandmother, both musicians as well. And there's my grandfather and to the far right, who had his own big band in Brooklyn, also in the 1970s. So I bring this up just to kind of show that, you know, this kind of insider knowledge of jazz, but specifically improvisation, right? What it means to pursue improvisation as not just an element in performance, but maybe even an approach to music making, an approach to ensemble organization, and what it means to improvise a life also given restricted circumstances. What it means for a Black woman to play something like a saxophone. You know, what kinds of improvisations would my grandmother would have had to go through being who she was when she was. And this is Brooklyn in the 1940s. So I'll just close off just by kind of leaving us in a weird in-between place, a place that I'm always speculating about. So my father put out a record in '67 called The Latin Lovin', which always makes me laugh because he was the most serious person I'd ever met when I was growing up. But there was a whole life that he led before I even showed up. I wasn't born in 1967 or any time around after that. I was born in '84. That speaks to a different time, a different place, a different community kind of sense too. And for someone who was so serious even in the 1970s, right, playing in these community organizations like this, to have in 1967 recorded a Boogaloo record also speaks to a kind of dovetailing of communities and community knowledge. And specifically that was African-American, Puerto Rican, and Cuban communities in New York City. So that's how my father got to Boogaloo. And so I'll just play a very quick clip and I'll end with just one more photo. So this is from Earl Coleman and the Latin Lovin' from 1967, Hippie Heaven. And there's a whole story behind this album that I can get into later, but here's a little piece from that record.
Let love be free and joy with LSD. Yeah, that's what you said, and now you are dead. I told you, baby, don't mess with STP, but you never listened to me. the cube and said to watch it fly.
Señoras y
Well, you
señores.
flew over.
Sorry about that. I played another clip. But anyway, very 1967. So I'll just end us there. But here, you know, I'm speculating out loud, and I hope you've been able to follow along what it means for someone to kind of straddle all of these different spaces and to think about musicality in those contexts where you have the very serious, you know, this search for identity and community politicization in and around the Nation of Islam, but also these Afro-Cuban / salsa ensembles that he played in as well. And then in this last picture here, this is when I was a young child. I was probably 1 year old when this picture was taken. I know this blue book in the background of this photo very well. So that's a collection of Brahms's piano pieces, because my father, when I was growing up, was completely involved and invested in the Western canon as a part of his training growing up in Brooklyn. But it seemed to me, looking back on it, at a almost a turn away from this past of his that involved boogaloo and songs about LSD and dancing, and also this politicized, this, you know, this very politically active element as well, happening just around the same time. So a lot of speculation, a lot of dovetailing, a lot of things confronting each other, but all in one person, all in one family, right? So, and I'll just end with a picture of both of us at the piano, and that's about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kwami, for that journey into your life. I understand you more now. I needed that earlier in our connection with each other. So we just have a few minutes left, not as many as I would have hoped, for questions and comments. And you're eligible to just unmute yourself and ask the question. But first, there's one in the chat that's for Nina, and I'll just read it out loud. Thank you for sharing your work with us. Thank you for sharing with us your recent work and the 3 metaphors. Question: have you seen any good examples of speculative works that have the potential of transcending the limits of those metaphors?
That's a big question. I think the work of Vijay and Kwami are really reaching, I think, many on this call, but it seems like we have to, because they are just so deep. And again, it's not just that these words exist and these systems and ways of writing exist, but they're in our bodies. I think that's the most serious, it's extremely serious. So it's even hard to sense music outside of them. So I think some of the work I've seen that is really trying to reach are maybe not coming from a very traditional music theory realm, but maybe more from sound studies or from Black studies or from other sort of theoretical realms. But we're here, and I can feel this movement now. Thank you.
Kwami or Vijay, do you want to just speak to that?
I want to just maybe echo what Nina said towards the end of her talk, which is that to let the music kind of organize our thoughts rather than vice versa. So maybe it's about deriving. What I was trying to do in my talk was essentially derive a way of speaking about the music from what it does to me as I move through it, as I listen to it, as it acts on me. And so allowing that, in a way, I sort of like vulnerable and open, starting from scratch, kind of start from that space, and actually attending to the body. And when I say the body, like I said, I mean how you move and how you feel, right? That's what our bodies do. It does our bodies do those things, and that letting that kind of govern the way we respond and the way we talk about it. I'm teaching a class now. Today we're talking about Hazel Scott, and just discovering all these, at least for us, realizing all these truths about her that have been kind of undervalued or unsung, unspoken. That she was pals with Art Tatum and with Billie Holiday and with Lester Young, and that she was a movie star, that she wrote her own ticket, she created her own path through this wildly unstable space of being a black woman musician in New York in the 40s and 50s. So, realizing the extent and the depth of radical inventiveness, I suppose, is kind of, I want to start from there.
Great. Are there any other questions? Because we're actually really almost out of time here. I would love if we could just extend another hour to have conversations, but unfortunately we're out of time, so we'll probably have to take some of the conversation off.
Can I ask Kwami a question?
Yes.
I mean, it was so beautiful, this whole rich archive that you shared. I'm just stunning, and so many stories. It's sort of like we're just scratching the surface of this world kind of being made or becoming. And I just wonder how you feel how this music feels to you. I mean, other than like you historicize it, you connect it to different existing styles and so forth, but it's also somehow yours, right? It's somehow connected to you in this profound way.
Yeah, I might need a whole other hour to try to get into that one, but I think one of the things that maybe I found myself doing is wanting to bring some of this vernacular insider knowledge into academic spaces for reasons that I'm now looking back on that might be more complicated than what I thought. Was I looking for validation? Was I just simply looking for some kind of certification on my own end so that I can go back into the community with a degree and continue the revolution onward? I don't know, but I think it's both. Like, growing up with someone like my father meant that Brahms was also something that felt very close to me as well. So it's a little disorienting, but it's also in a almost idealistic way, this idea that you can own the subculture that you come from while also having entry into these other spaces, especially if they're more elite or rarefied, and find something to own there as well. Maybe own is not the best verb, but something along those. And that's kind of what I feel when I hear it as well. Like it does speak to a deep part of me because it's a part of how I grew up. There are elements of alienation too, because at 1967, I wasn't doing LSD in 1967, although I wish I was. So it's just so many layers. But I think just having access to these things and knowing where they fit in the filament of your life, or in the cosmic ether. It's hard. I really have to think about that a little more.
All right, we've got to wrap up and transition to the next panel. I just want to thank Vijay, thank Nina, thank you, Kwami, for your work. And it's so, you can even just do a little whatever. But it's so suggestive for future work, and I would love to hear more on this subject at any time. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good to see you, everybody.